My name is Jason Eiseman. I'm the librarian for emerging technologies at Yale Law School. I'm here with Tom Boone, reference librarian at Loyola Law School, Los Angeles. And we're going to talk about building awesome library web apps with open source technology. And this presentation is kind of geared towards librarians who want to get started with open source web development. So we tried not to get too techy, but if you have any questions or comments at any time, please don't hesitate to let us know. Now, this presentation is grown out of conversations Tom and I have had about what we can do to build better websites. And so what we'd like to do is talk about some of our efforts towards that end and some of what other people have done and some of the technologies we're looking at to make that happen. So why are we focusing on open source technology? There are a couple of different reasons. The number one reason, obviously, is economics. Open source technology generally being freely available means that we can do more with less. And with library budgets being slashed, that's going to be really important. But just as importantly to me is the extensibility of open source technology. Because open source technology allows users to access the actual source code of the applications, you can build on top of that to create really powerful, robust web applications. So let's get started talking about building a web app from the ground up. And I'm going to start really basic, talking about something that I think gets glossed over a little too much, and that's setting up your web server. So the basic components of setting up a web server are the operating system, web server software, database, and your program language. And this is called stack. So the most popular stacks are LAMP, which is the Linux operating system, Apache HTTP software, MySQL database software, and a programming language like PHP or Perl or Python. Another popular one is WAMP, which is the same thing, except on Windows. Now, I know Windows is not an open source operating system, but the bottom line is some of our institutions are not supporting open source operating systems. So it's important to know that you can set up these open source applications on Windows operating systems as well. When you're downloading an open source application, like WordPress or Drupal, which we're going to talk about later, and you look at the system requirements for running that open source application, hopefully it'll give you everything you need to know to set up your web server in these kinds of terms. It'll tell you what operating system you need, it'll tell you what version of Apache you need, or if you need another web server, what you should use, database software you need to use, and what version of that you need to use. As well, it should tell you the programming language that you need to operate the open source application as well. And if you don't have access to your own web server, or if your organization is not supporting open source software, you do have another option. Virtualization technology allows you to run a virtual computer environment on a host computer. So, for example, in my office I have a desktop PC which runs Windows. And I can use virtualization technology to create a Linux computing environment that runs on my Windows PC. Now, this is really important for creating awesome web apps for a couple of different reasons. First, virtualization is being used by a lot of institutions for actual production web servers. So a lot of institutions' websites are actually being run by virtual web servers, and knowing how to work with those virtual web servers is becoming increasingly important. But also, with virtualization technology, you can actually set up your own kind of sandbox, your own development environment. And if you're going to do open source web development, then setting up that development environment is really important. For example, at Yale, we've established a kind of process by which I can download any open source application I want. I run it in a virtual machine on my work PC, and then when it's ready to go, I can push it out to a production web server. And there's even open source software that can get you started with virtualization as well. It's called VirtualBox. And this is what it looks like. On the left side of the screen, you have a virtual machine that I've created. On the right side of the screen are the details for that virtual machine. One thing that I will mention that you need to keep an eye out for if you get started with this is memory usage. If you get a lot of these virtual machines running, they use up the actual resources on your host computer, and if it's not set up for it, if it can't handle too many at the same time, there can be some performance issues. Creating a new virtual machine with VirtualBox is pretty easy. There's a window that wizard that helps you set it up. You specify the operating system. You set the memory usage and things like that you want set up. And then you can specify an installation file, a .iso file that you want to use to install the operating system. So here, I'm installing a Linux operating system that's actually running in VirtualBox on a Windows PC. So it's pretty easy to set up, and one of the nice things about open source operating systems like Linux is that for all the different flavors of Linux that are out there that are open source, you can download these freely available installation files, .iso files, and create virtual machines, test them out, see which ones work best, and download the open source software to run them. Now, one thing you should also be aware of when you start working with this is to actually navigate to web applications running on a virtual machine pretty much anywhere. You're going to need to start becoming familiar with networking and IP address issues in your organization. So at Yale, for example, we have a nice process where I work with the IT department to get the IP addresses necessary and the networking necessary to put these virtual machines on the network. So people in the library can connect to the web applications I'm running on my PC and test them out that way. That particular version of Linux that I installed is called Turnkey Linux. And one of the best ways to get started with some of these open source applications is to find bundles of software that'll help you set up everything nice and easy. Turnkey Linux is an example of that. They have a suite of programs they call software appliances. And these are downloadable as .iso installation images. And the nice thing about it is it installs everything you need to get up and running with these applications. So, for example, if you decide after this presentation that you want to get started with WordPress, you can download the WordPress appliance from here, and it'll install Linux and Apache and MySQL and PHP and WordPress. And when the installation is done, everything will hopefully be working properly, and you can start using WordPress right from there. XAMPP is another popular example of this. It's a software program you can download that'll install Apache, MySQL, PHP, and Perl. It'll install it on any operating system. And one of our sponsors, Acquia, has a program called Acquia Drupal that'll install all the software you need to set up your web server, plus the Drupal application.
Plus many modules, very popular modules that ordinarily for Drupal you would have to download one by one separately and install.
That was kind of a whirlwind tour. Are there any questions about that kind of stuff? Yeah. Okay. So talking about actual open source web apps. Oh,
One question.
Yeah.
With the turnkey applications, do they take a lot less resources? Do they take a lot?
How do you mean a lot less resources?
Well, I mean, I can imagine it's a lot less packages than a full install. Overall, do you find it's a large advantage over a general Linux install?
I find the advantage not in necessarily the size of the install, but the ease of use, getting up and running and testing an open source application in my development environment. So, you know, whenever I want to try something out, if I have something that requires Ruby on Rails, or if I have something, you know, that I just need to play around with it. I don't know PostgreSQL. I don't know that database software. I need to get it installed. I need to get it working and work with it. This is just an easy way to get that done. So. Now, if you ask Tom, he'll tell you that my assimilation to the Drupal cult is on schedule. But it's actually not my favorite go-to open source operating system. And that's because I love blogging. It's, in my opinion, blogging is the best way to get a really easy to use, easy to update website up and running really quickly. And my favorite blogging software is WordPress. So that's what I'm going to talk about a little bit right now. And it's important to note that WordPress.org is the WordPress blogging software that you download and install yourself, versus WordPress.com, which is their hosted solution. So this is the WordPress website. And it's really easy to just get a copy of WordPress that you can download from there. They have what they call their famous 5-minute install. And once you get familiar setting up your web server software, it is really easy to install WordPress software. There's also a really nice application called WordPress Multi-User. They use that Greek letter, MU, but it actually just stands for multi-user. And the way you use this is if you want to have multiple blogs, let's say, for your library site, but you don't want to have multiple installations of WordPress. You can create one single installation of WordPress multi-user and manage multiple blogs from there. So just to give you the ins and outs of WordPress, in case you're not familiar with it, I'm going to show you this website we did last year for the American Association of Law Libraries Local Arrangements Committee. If you look at previous versions of the previous Local Arrangements Committee websites, you'll see that the blogs and the websites are very separate. They usually host the blogs on Blogger or some other server like that, and then they have static HTML pages to run the website. And when I looked through the previous reports of the webmasters who created these annual meeting websites, I saw that they spent so much time just setting up the static HTML pages, and they spend so much time entering content for people. And we really wanted to avoid that, and WordPress was a really good way to do that. Thankfully, Lewis and Clark Law School, local school in Oregon, had a WordPress multi-user installation that we could use to create the blog. Now, you can create posts and pages. This is the home page. It's actually just a static page, but it has all the features you expect of blog software. You can search it, create categories, tag posts, embed images, look at recent blog posts, all those types of things. You can also create pages where you can embed scripts. This is a script that we embedded that displays a Flickr badge. Embed Google Maps and video and all that type of thing. But one of the really great things we were able to set up is that we could set it up so that people could register themselves to use the blog, which is really nice. So instead of me having to post content for other people, I could just kind of moderate it, which is what a webmaster should really be doing. Looking at the back end of WordPress, there's obviously blogs get a lot of spam in their comments, and one of the most powerful features of WordPress is the ability to filter out that spam. In addition to actually filtering out spam like this, you can change the settings in WordPress to only accept comments from certain people. You can require people register for your site to post comments and things like that. Another nice feature is the ability to create advanced options at a really granular level. So for example, on individual posts or pages, you can create a password protected page. You can use a custom template to change the look of an individual page. and do some other nice things like that. The way you customize the look and feel of WordPress is with themes. Themes are really easy to use. Widgets are those sidebar elements that display different information. You can customize those, including simple HTML you can add in there. And another powerful feature I really like about WordPress is that if you want to edit the template files or the CSS files or anything like that, instead of going into the web server and actually opening up the files there, you can actually edit the style sheets and the templates right here. So this is a style sheet for the site. If I want to edit the styles, I can do it here and save it, and those changes will be reflected on the site. And if you know PHP, you can do the same thing with the PHP templates. Plugins work pretty much the same way as themes. You can download them, install them, and using the plugin editor, you can also edit the code of the plugins as well. Themes and plugins are available on the WordPress website under Extend. Thousands of each. They do all sorts of different things. And just to show you kind of how easy it is to install a theme or an add-on, plugin rather, I have a simple WordPress install here. So there's a WordPress folder, WP content folder, plugins folder, and themes folder. And I'm just going to, I've downloaded a theme called Pixel and a plugin called Add to Any. And you can just drag and drop those into the appropriate plugins or themes folder. So here, drop the Pixel theme into the themes folder, and the plugin add-on, the Add to Any plugin to the plugins folder. And then when you go back to the back end of the website, and you go to the appearance and edit themes for the website, you'll see that the Pixel theme is available right there right away. And you can go ahead and activate it. It'll give you a preview before you actually activate it. And it works the same with the plugins as well. So once it loads, the plugin will be available because we've installed it, dropped it in the folder, you activate it, and it'll be ready to go. And then when that's all set, and we visit the front end of the website, we'll see that the theme we selected is active. And the plugin we installed, which allows you to share posts and pages with various social media sites, are all ready to go. And this was really just a couple of minutes to do. So taking a look at what some other people are doing with WordPress. Harvard Law School uses WordPress multi-user for their web blogs. Along with sticking with the theme with WordPress multi-user, they just recently released something called BuddyPress, which is like a social networking software that works in conjunction with WordPress multi-user. And I haven't seen a lot of people doing interesting things with it, but the potential is there to do some interesting things. It has all your basic social networking features, and it's connected with all the blogs that your institution has created. North Plains Public Library in Oregon needed to upgrade their website, and they just created a simple WordPress site to run it. LegalVoices.com uses a customized WordPress theme and some clever back-end coding to repost the tweets of selected legal Twitterers. But it's really just a basic WordPress site doing all the work. And one of my favorite uses of WordPress is Scriblio. Scriblio is a collection of customized WordPress code and plugins that, when used in conjunction together, create a customized library website specifically geared towards using bibliographic data. So it was developed by Casey Visson at Plymouth State University. This is their website, which runs Scriblio. And I've run a search for Fight Club, and this result coming out of their catalog is displayed as kind of a blog post. You can click on the title of the post, which is the title of the book, and get more information. And people can leave comments on the book and things like that. So this might be a little early for it, because I'm going to come back in just a few minutes. All this information, you don't have to write it down. We've posted these slides on the site as well. So Tom Boone is going to talk about Drupal.
All right, time for the Kool-Aid. All right, apparently I don't know how to use the touchpad on the Pro. All right, so now that we've talked about, the way that slide a little bit there. Now we've talked about WordPress a little bit. We'll talk about Drupal. And this is the Drupal website where you go to download Drupal as well as to download add-on modules, contributed themes, lots and lots of documentation and support forums. Every single contributed theme, every single contributed module. The modules, I'll talk about modules and themes in a second to get you more familiar with them. They all have issue trackers where users are submitting bugs and feature requests and support requests. The maintainer of the module or even other members of the Drupal community will post fixes, patches, and help out everyone to be able to get all of this software working the way that it's intended to work. Drupal is a content management system. I'll probably sort of butcher the definition of a content management system because as it's developed, it's sort of meant a lot of different things. Essentially, content management system is software for maintaining content, managing content on the web. That content can be just about anything, and essentially, one of the earliest definitions was that it separated content from design, so that those people who were providing content for a website didn't have to worry about designing the site, formatting the site, whereas people who were creating sites in static HTML, a lot of times, especially in earlier versions of HTML, you actually had to be creating the design of the page as you were adding the content. But what a content management system allows you to do is you have designers who design, and then you have content providers who come in and add content to the site, and when they publish that content, it's integrated into the site in the way that the designer intended. So that's a very simplistic way of looking at it because the longer that I am using Drupal, and I've been using it for almost 5 years now, the more and more I realize that there is virtually nothing on a web page that I can't do with Drupal. Anything that you want to build online, I can do it in Drupal. If you want a course management system, I've done that 2 years in a row. I ran an online course when I was at UNLV using Drupal instead of using something that was designed to be a course management system. I have built scheduling software for the AALL conference this year that allow people to create their own personal custom schedules, share their schedules with other people. Just essentially, like I said, the more that I use it, the more I realize there's nothing that I can't do with it. And as the years have gone by, there used to be a lot of different content management systems that were in very heavy use. That number has started to drop considerably as years have gone by, and Drupal, for open source content management, Drupal is the one that seems to have emerged as having the largest community, and that community is so important because without the community you wouldn't have all of the contributed modules, which are what add functionality to a Drupal website. So, in talking about modules, you basically want to add some sort of function that's not already there. And so, for example, on this we have what comes out of the box with Drupal is a content type called a story. And essentially, that the story has a field for a title and then a text box for the body text. That text box is just a plain text box. Depending upon which format you set for that, you can put in plain text, you can put in HTML text, you can even put in PHP text if you add another module that allows you to do that. But out of the box, it's just a plain box. And so what if you want a WYSIWYG editor? Now, there's questions about whether we really want WYSIWYG editors to give people the power to do that. But for non-techie users, a lot of times you want something that resembles that sort of Microsoft Word functionality. And so if we go to the Drupal.org website, this is just one of the popular WYSIWYG editors called FCK Editor. It's an unfortunate name, but that's the one that I use whenever I need to use an editor on one of my sites. And you download it from this page, you just drop it into the modules directory in your Drupal installation on the server. Then you go to the modules page, which you'll see here at the bottom. You have all of these checkboxes to turn on different modules. You hit submit, and you go back to the page, and there's your WYSIWYG editor. And you have full control over what buttons you actually show there. And on top of that, you have full control over which types of users see which buttons. So I can have any number of different WYSIWYG editor types there. And in Drupal, you have complete control over the users too. I can create any number of roles that I want. So I can have content editors, I can have content approvers, I can have admins who have access to everything on the site. I can have students, I can have faculty, I can have whatever I want. I'm not limited to just whatever types of roles that come default on the content management system. And so I can then, for each of those roles, I can give students just basically the ability to just bold, underline, and italicize text. Whereas I can give an administrator the ability to add styles to things, which can get a little unwieldy if you let everybody have that ability. But I have that really tight granular control over people's permissions. At the same token, then you have themes, which something that Jason talked about with WordPress. And essentially, you just go to the site, you find a theme that you like. There are many, many, many contributed themes available on Drupal.org. And just drop it into the themes directory. Go to the theme administration page on the back end and select the enable, and you can set a default theme. And then you can take a site and have it go from this to this to this to that, just by changing which theme you have activated on the site. So I want to talk about a couple of specific applications that I'm working with right now using Drupal in libraries. And they are both still, and I would probably say, some sort of alpha stage because I'm still actively building both of them. But what's there, I think, is relevant to this discussion. The first thing is, at Loyola, I have, as many of you, I have a certain number of faculty who are assigned to me. I'm their library liaison. And whenever they have requests for research or specific documents, they come to me, they tell me what they want through email, through a phone call, somehow. And then it's my job to get them what they need. And traditionally, I've been using email to do this mostly. You have documents that you get through PDF format or some other electronic format. You attach it to an email and you send it on to them. And then I have a copy on my computer that maybe I keep, maybe I don't. The file name may help me know what that document is, or it may be something where I have no clue what that PDF file is, even if I have it stored in a specific folder for that faculty member or even that research request. And of course, if the faculty member loses their email that has that, they delete the email that had that attached PDF, well, that's gone. So what I wanted to do was to create some sort of organized web interface for the faculty that I work with to both deliver the information to them and keep it organized in some way for them, and something that they could come back to later and still see all of their requests and retrieve their documents. So this is one of our faculty members who has wasn't really asked to do so, but has been enthusiastic about it. Michael Gutentag has agreed to be sort of my guinea pig on this. And so you see that on June 8th, he submitted a research request. And these are the documents. This is just a portion of the documents that were on the list that he submitted. And those that I have found full text, rather than attach a PDF to an email, I have, you see a link here. Anything that has this icon is a full text document. Got a quasi Blue Book citation. It works in journal articles and things like that. For book chapters and other things, it gets a little spotty about how well it's working, but that's a problem with my coding, not with Drupal, just so you know. But all you have to do, click on that link, and that links to the PDF. This is just a better display. I can annotate what exactly is going on with each request. So the one with the hourglass means it's a pending request, and it says that I'm checking availability. Ones with the other delivery, you see it says up there at the top on the first one that I requested the interlibrary loan for that one. So this is the back end of what one of those requests looks like. When I get a request from Mike, I put in the date, put in there's a drop down there for all of my faculty. I select him from the list, give it a title so that it's more than just the date is displayed, and then these are all of the documents that I've attached. So this is all accomplished through a module that's called Content Construction Kit, which basically allows you to add custom fields of various types to content in Drupal. Individual pieces of content in Drupal are called nodes. It's a Drupal-specific sort of lingo, and it's something that it seems very bizarre when you first start using it. Eventually, you completely embrace it, and you'll start seeing nodes everywhere, even when you're asleep. But within Content Construction Kit, there are specific types of fields that you can add. And you'll see at the top, I have a date field, which you add in. There's user reference. Mike Gutentag has a user account on this site, and so I just select his user account, his profile, to be attached to this request. That way, it makes it so that only Mike can see this request. He has to log into the site, and he only sees his request. He can't see anyone else's. No one else can see his. The request title is just a basic text field. You can make that text field a single plain text field. You can make it a text area that takes in HTML or PHP code. And then each of those documents is a separate node on the site. And so that's a node reference field. So essentially, in the request node, I am then attaching articles or book chapters, whatever they might be, which are themselves nodes. I haven't added it onto this site, but there's even a module that will allow you to click on a link in the node reference field to add a new node reference which doesn't exist yet. So in this case, the request node type, which is what this is, I can attach here article content types. And so it will then have a button that says add an article. And I click it, it pops up with an interface that has the field, or the form to submit a new article. When I hit submit, that pop-up disappears, and it adds that node to the system, and then it appears as one of the reference articles there. And this is what one of the forms looks like to add the article. It just asks for basic bibliographic information, along with the field for the annotation. If I want to put something there about interlibrary loan requested, checking availability, whatever I want to add there as information for Mike to see about that particular document. Something else that I'm doing is within Drupal you can actually have a field that is a file attachment field. so that I can just upload the PDF directly into Drupal and have a link show up in this node. For bandwidth reasons, file storage reasons, because I'm not running this on one of Loyola's servers, I'm running it on one of my own personal hosting accounts. I'm not actually storing those files, but I'm using something that I've talked about in the past, which is using Dropbox as a document delivery service. And so I'm actually storing these files on Dropbox, which places a folder on my computer, has a copy online on the Dropbox website, and any other computers that I have set up, there's a local copy that all syncs together whenever I add or delete something, I make any changes at all. Yeah.
On this screen, like you created this with CCK.
Yes.
Can you add, like for example, if you have an image of a JPEG, image of a book cover, can you add that image?
Yes. The file field that I talked about, where you could attach the PDFs, file field has a submodule for image attachment. And then just to make it even more robust and complex, there's something else there's another module called image cache, which no matter what size of an image that you upload onto this node, you would then be able to have settings to say, well, actually I want this to be cropped or resized to a certain size, and then every node would display a uniform image size, so that you would have consistency throughout the entire site. And you can actually use a different image cache setting on different places where you display that node information. And I'll talk about views in a second. You can use a different size image on a view listing as you would on the actual node page, but you still are just uploading one image, no matter what size it is. So essentially, this, the idea that I'm using this as a link is just something that I'm using for this site, but the file attachment, using a link to something online. If you didn't want to even mess with the files at all, if you had access to a PDF that was online, you could just drop the hyperlink that is being used for accessing it directly through SSRN or Hide Online or something free on the web, and then it would still, if I go back here to this page, that link that I add to the document is what creates this hyperlink on the title of the article. And if I already have an article in the system as opposed to one that I'm creating on the fly when I'm attaching them to the request, as I type in the name of the article, it goes by whatever the title of that particular article node is. I've got it set up to be the same as the title of the article itself. So as I type in the title of the article, the node reference field searches through all of the existing article nodes and finds one that matches what I'm typing, auto-completes, I select it, and it's attached. And yeah, what I have displayed here is the actual request node, which is just listing everything from this May bibliography request. But this is a display of each of Mike's requests along with all of the documents that are attached to them. And this is using something called views. Views is basically, it's an add-on module for Drupal that you will use over and over and over again. I mean, for any site, basically, Drupal core, which is the basic code base for Drupal, one of the first things you will add into any of those sites is CCK and views, which allows you to create any sort of content that you want with any sorts of fields, and then to use views to display it however you want. It's basically a database query where you assign certain criteria, and you'll see that for this listing of Mike's requests, I'm just looking for, you'll see the node type listed here under the filters is a research request. And whether or not the node is published, which controls whether or not something is visible to other users other than just admins on the site. And then I've selected which fields that I want. And I want the node title and then the documents title. And in this one, with the node title is what displays the name of the request itself, and then the content documents title is what lists each of those requests underneath that, each of the documents under that request. Any questions about the faculty service document delivery thing that I'm in the process of building? Yeah, basically, I still have a lot of things to do on that. I want to be able to have a lot of that information more accessible individually. I have a text field for the authors. I want to be able to actually have be able to categorize authors individually, so that you can actually see all of the documents that the faculty member has requested from a specific author individually. I want to allow the faculty member to be able to place tags on different articles and different requests, so that they can categorize the information themselves rather than just have it locked into this categorized by when they requested it. And these are things that are still in early development on this. Yeah.
This sounds similar to our faculty web service where we put in our reference requests. Faculty can make requests to the service, but we can also add information. Then we can go back and search like faculty
Right.
name by date. So is that something similar to that?
Yeah, and something else that is essential to get this working in a way that will be seamless for the faculty is to allow them to submit their requests in a way that goes directly into the system. One way is to have it integrated with email, so that they send an email to the faculty, to the reference email address. The Drupal site will automatically see that email, see who it's from, and will create a piece of information in the system that will then alert the librarian that this request has come in. And for those faculty members who would rather actually go to the site and submit it that way, to be able to do it directly on the site with a form, where they can either type in everything they want into a text box, or they can attach a Word document that has all of their all the documents that they're requesting. But the idea is that for those faculty members who like using email and don't want something new, that they can still keep sending email the way that they always did, and the work on the end of the librarian to integrate that email into the system will be next to nothing.
Yeah, right now we have to do it. There's an email address where you can send the request, but then you have to enter it.
Right.
So I have one last question, privacy, because the information is going on Dropbox, is there?
Dropbox, yes.
So, like for us, all the information is on internal servers.
Right. And Dropbox is not my last best solution for this. I mean, the easiest thing would be file attachments, but I'm doing Dropbox for this reason. However, at the same time, you can set up a free Dropbox account for each of your faculty members, so they have their own spaces available to store files where they could access them through this interface or access them through a folder directly on their computer. And Dropbox has a public folder where you can place files that would show up, that anybody who knew the direct link to that file would be able to access it. But unless something is in that public folder, the only person who has access to what's on there is the actual user who owns the account. The idea being that if we went that route, both the faculty member and the librarian would have access to that folder, but nobody else. And also the idea being that on here that, especially if you are using a file attachment system rather than links, then the only people who can see what Mike Gutentag has requested is Mike Gutentag and me. And obviously there are some copyright concerns about posting this stuff on the web in this way and keeping them persistent. I don't know that I am doing something that's completely out of a gray area, but the way I look at it, I'm just providing a graphic interface for files that the faculty member would have stored permanently anyway. and they aren't available to anyone else. Any other questions about that? You try and talk about course management quickly. This is the website that I'm building for the CS/SIS Web 2.0 Challenge that starts later this summer. And just to give you an idea of how essential views are to a Drupal website, I was going to point out how many views there are on this page. There's the first view, which is listing each week of the class. Then there's one that lists which group the individual member is in. Then a view that lists the most recent course announcements that have been made. And then at the bottom, the most recent student blog posts that have been made. And then in terms of the depth that you can go into with attaching content to other pieces of content, each week here is a node. Then within that week, there are 2 unit nodes. In week 2, we have Flickr, and we have social bookmarking. Then, within each unit, there are specific pieces of content, be they an intro, a screencast, links and examples, and assignment. Each of those are separate nodes that are attached to the unit. So you can make this stuff really complex, but still display it in a way that is very usable for the individual user. Organic groups is another module that is helpful for a lot of applications. Any sort of application where you want to have groups of users who are segmented across the site into their own sort of private places. They don't have to be private, they can be public as well. I think you want to assign people into groups, but it also allows groups to have their own private space within the site. And so for the CS/SIS course, we have small groups that each of the participants are placed into. And so here we have small group 1, shows who the group members are. There's you, Casey, is the facilitator for group number 1. I've dropped in a few users who aren't actually in that group, but we don't have any
That's
users
fine.
yet.
I'll keep those.
So, basically, this is something that only members of Group 1 can see. And, there's a group chat room that is added in there where they can have their own private place to have their weekly group chats.
Is
yeah.
the group chat a module?
No, it's actually, I'm embedding Amiibo rooms into there. There are a few modules in Drupal for chat, but I couldn't get any of them to work perfectly, so I opted for the hosted solution. And in terms of setting up organic groups, I've got this set as a private group so that no one else can see that group except for the people who are in the group. Whether or not it shows up in the directory of groups, and then finally, how people become members of that group. And you can be anything where it can go from the range of absolutely anyone can just say, okay, I want to be part of this group and sign up and be part of the group, or down to something where only an administrator on the site has the ability to go in and add members. And this is what that administrator would see, is just a box where you add usernames, people who have user accounts on the site. Add them in there and they become members of that group. Something else that I'm going to be using on this site quite a bit is something called embedded media field. And this is something that allows you to add multimedia content from other websites, video, audio, photos. The embedded media field supports a vast array of websites, external websites. YouTube is supported, Flickr is supported. This is a video that's from Blip TV that I've added in just for demonstration purposes to make sure it was working. And once you have that set up, this is another CCK field where you are adding in a field of the type embedded media. And I've set this particular field up to accept content from Blip TV, but every one of those sites that's supported on embedded media field has its own way to set this up. And once you do that, when you're creating a node that has that field, all you have to do and it tells you which services are supported on this particular field. I've only checked off Flip. But all you have to do is just enter in the URL that points to that, and the admin settings for embedded media field will tell Drupal what size to display that video display. And then once you add that in, the content from the external site drops in automatically. And people don't have to actually leave your website in order to view this information. And YouTube, things like that, have always provided embed code for people to add their content into their own site, but this doesn't require you to go and drop in all that embed code directly into the HTML. Just take the URL, drop it in, and your website does the rest. That's my content, or my contact information. And now we are going to talk about something else that both Jason and I worked on together and separately.
Yeah, that's right. Tom got it started when he was at Yale, and so I finished it up. This is the Yale Judicial Nominations Database, which just went live a little while ago. And just to tell you a little bit what's going on here, it tracks judicial nominations from the 103rd Congress to current. It tells you everything that happened with each particular nominee. You have RSS feeds, so you can track recent nominations and recent confirmations. And because we're Yale, we pay particular attention to tracking Yale grads who've been nominated to the federal bench. But one of the more interesting parts of this particular application is the faceted searching. So in addition to being able to just do a regular nominee search, there's also a faceted search here. You can search for nominees by president status, jurisdiction, Congress, etc. You can combine facets. So if you want to see every nomination Bill Clinton made to the 9th Circuit, you can see that. If you want to see every nomination Bill Clinton made to the 9th Circuit who was confirmed or withdrawn or whatever, you can combine the facets that way to search that way as well. Here's an example. This is Sonia Sotomayor, and as you can see, every single nomination is an individual event. She was nominated in the 105th Congress to the 2nd Circuit by Bill Clinton, and now she's been nominated to the U.S. Supreme Court. And the nomination timeline shows every single event in her nomination just in the time. So it doesn't separate it out. And then we have some contact information, because ideally, for Yale anyway, this will be used for students looking for clerkships. So this is an example of using the facets. I've clicked on jurisdiction, 6th Circuit, and this shows all the nominees listed for the 6th Circuit. And if you click, and as you can see here, with nominee Eric Clay, it'll list someone who's returned and confirmed in the same Congress. Actually, it's a different Congress, but it'll list both events that happened in the 6th Circuit for each individual nominee. It'll group them together in this results page. So looking behind the scenes about how this works, this is a screenshot of the faceted search module, which allows you to select the fields that you want to use in the faceted search. You can also select the criteria that it's sorted by. So if we wanted to sort by number instead of Congress, so it would list the Congresses in order of how many people were nominated in that Congress. We could do that. And also you can set categories.
Of course, the great thing about this, for those of you who have seen some of the next generation OPACs, you know that those facets are a big part of what is being added into library catalogs. And as librarians, we tend to like metadata. We tend to like being able to search things by granular pieces of information. And so, you know, theoretically, you could build your own faceted OPAC within Drupal, but you could build a faceted search for anything. I mean, this is just one application for being able to do this, but anything that has metadata, you'd be able to browse through it by multiple pieces of criteria rather than having to just run a keyword search and play with the terms. You can actually, as you go through there, you can add and remove individual facets from the search while keeping the others attack.
Right, and going back to what you were talking about before with the power of views, faceted search has the ability to create views and send that facet result information into a view to sculpt how the results look. Talking about content types, so we created content types to store all this information. Tom was talking about that a little earlier. Every nomination event, a nomination, a confirmation, a hearing is a type of event. Nominee is the person's biographical information, and then the nominee status is the content type that holds the result, the status of each individual nomination. And one thing we also wanted to mention here is computed fields. You have the ability, one of the things I wanted to do when I started working on this process is make it really easy for other librarians at Yale to be able to update the data. So instead of having to go back and look up, well, who was the president during this particular Congress, because sometimes they overlap, and which Congress was on this date when this person was nominated, we were able to create a computed field, which basically uses PHP to assign a president, a Congress, all that type of information based on the date someone is nominated. So when Yale librarians are entering information to the database, that president information, Congress information is going to be automatically calculated based on this code. And I think that's about it. Are there any questions?
Is the computed thing there different than just like a table UI? Couldn't there be like a lookup table that would say if your dates are between a certain range, pull this? Or is that required for the facets search that's there?
I suppose you could do that, although that would require like structuring an SQL query to the database.
Well, as far as using computed field, pretty much anything you can do in computed field, if you are advanced enough to be doing working in custom modules, building your own modules in Drupal, or doing advanced theming, a whole lot of the stuff that you would ordinarily do in computed field are things that you can and probably should do best practice-wise within the module files and theme files. But for somebody who has not progressed to that level yet, which at the time that I was working on this this website before Jason came on board, I wasn't to that level yet, and so computed field was a nice bridge for that purpose. But now I would probably not use a computed field. Jason, at some point, since he's drinking the Kool-Aid, at some point, Jason will be using that. And it's not about, because Jason knows PHP a heck of a lot better than I do. I'm really sketchy on PHP. I can do things in Drupal, but Jason hasn't been using Drupal that much, so his knowledge of the hooks and conventions within Drupal are not as progressed. So,
although I don't mean that in a negative way.
No,
I understand. Although I'll admit, I'm not totally into Drupal yet, but it's been pretty powerful. And once there was a point during the project when a switch kind of flipped, and I was like, oh wow, we can do some pretty amazing things.
I'm listening to this, and it sounds really interesting, but I've got two thoughts. Are you expecting average librarians to learn this and apply it?
well, I'll put it this way. Computed field is not something that an average librarian is going to be probably doing. But things like content construction kit, being able to create your own custom content types with custom fields of various types. Really, the way that you set it up is you download the module, you drop it into the right folder, you go to the module's admin page, you turn it on, and then that type of field is now available to you.
And this is why I talked about extensibility at the beginning, because one of the things I really like about Drupal and WordPress is you can make something really simple. It can be just a blog, it can be just a simple website, but if you invest the time, if you have the talent, you can do something really powerful. and there's a wide area in between. So do I expect average librarians to create really sophisticated websites right off the bat? No, but creating a simple blog or website is easier to
So
do.
did you learn by doing, or did you start taking classes?
Learn by doing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I did.
A workshop, you guys have done a workshop.
Well, we've suggested, haven't we?
How much are you willing to pay?
Yeah.
Talk to the powers that be. Okay.
I think there's some talk about maybe doing something.
Yeah, there's talk about doing various things, whether or not Drupal or WordPress would be part of that, I don't know.
We've got some of that with the W-1 workshop, the CSSIS workshop. Some of that, that's you built that, the same people who did the 1 hour thing at AALL last year, we had 600 people apply, and we're,
That's coming up next month.
yeah, it's at AALL. We've still got a couple of slots open in there.